continue our journey through the book of Deuteronomy. If you turn your Bibles to Deuteronomy chapter 14, we're going to be reading verses 22 through 29. And then we're going to skip ahead to chapter 15, verses 19 through 23. But we're going to start our journey through this passage in Deuteronomy 14:22. It's about a real popular subject in 21st century American Christianity, tithing. It's not a popular subject. In fact, I know of a number of people who purposely avoid the church because they think that all the church does is ask for money, which is the reason why I have chosen to always put the offering before anything else. The call to worship, the auxiliary text, the offering. It's put as early in the service as I feel we can put it without being totally disjointed. The reason is, and this is, by the way, completely opposite of everybody's opinion of how it should be. Almost everybody says, in fact, those above me in Free Methodism want it at the end of the service. Why? Because you can motivate people to give more at the end of the service. I don't want you to be motivated by what I say. I want you to be motivated by what God's done for you. And that's why I purposely put it third in the order of worship, so that nobody can accuse me of twisting your arm and nobody can accuse me of wrangling around in order to get you to give. You can't give anymore this service. So there. Okay, some of you didn't find that amusing, but I'm serious. I've wrestled with this long and hard. There's not a church in the world that wouldn't love to have more money to work with, and we're no exception to that. But folks, I refuse to manipulate you. I probably do it unknowingly anyway. But I know myself well enough to know that if it was after the message, I'd try to get something in to try to encourage you to give more. And I just don't trust myself. I don't trust humankind, human nature. So that's, anyway. So you know why the offering comes early. The tithing predates Moses and Deuteronomy by at least 400 years, because we know that Abraham gave tithes to Melchizedek when he was in those battles. And we know that Jacob gave tithes to Yahweh, to God at Bethel. And it seems, and it's probably true, that a tithe was given in order to show respect, in order to show recognition of where everything comes from. And the tithe was given in order to demonstrate that I understood, God, I'm grateful to you for what you've given to me. Here's a portion back. And we'll find out in today's text that everything is God's. And we need to recognize that, and the tithe is a good way to do that and to honor the God of the universe. The tithe was also given to the priests because the priests didn't have any income other than what they got through the giving of the tithes for the people of Israel. So the Levites all were dependent upon the people of Israel to give their tithes in order for them to have sustenance. God gave them land enough to have a house, but that was it. They didn't have any land in order to grow crops, in order to gain an income. They didn't have vineyards. They didn't have fruit trees. They didn't have corn or wheat or any of those kind of things. They were dependent upon the tithe for their livelihood. And the same is pretty much true of myself, with Pastor Dave, Pastor Jody, who's working with the kids. We all depend upon your giving in order for ourselves to have a livelihood. In fact, in about 3 weeks, those that are members of the church will be getting the budget for next year. And we anticipate a certain amount of money coming in, and we anticipate certain monies going out. And we try to run this church as faithfully, as well as we feel we can with what God gives us, which is the money you provide for us. That's true also in the text that we're reading here. The Levites didn't have any income other than what the people of Israel gave them. And the Levites were also in charge of the benevolences, which we have benevolences as well in this church. In fact, every week we're getting new requests for people that need money, for electric bills, for food, for gas, for medical bills, all those kind of things. And we have a couple of ladies in this church that screen those requests, because not all of them are legitimate. shock of all shocks. People would actually ask a church for money and not be legitimate. Oh, yeah. And I was wasting a lot of time doing that research myself, and a couple ladies in the church have graciously agreed to do that, and I am eternally grateful for the job they do. They do a great job of doing that. Now, hopefully soon, Love Incorporated will be up and running, and the new director sits right here. And Love Incorporated will do that screening for us, so it'll take a lot of weight off of us, and we'll be able to just give to Love Incorporated and give to the people as they screen them and make life a lot easier for all the churches in Hillsdale County. But we're not quite there yet. But hopefully soon that will be up and running, and that'll be taken care of. And in fact, we don't want to give, and I'm sure Love Incorporated doesn't want to support people that giving to them would actually make them more sinful. You say, how could that happen? Oh, it can happen really easy. We seldom give the individual cash. If they have an electric bill, we pay the bill. If they have a food bill, we give them either groceries or give them a gift card for a place that we know that they can not spend it on other things that would be destructive for them. If they need a gas card, we give them a gas card to get a gas. And you're saying, well, they can abuse that. Oh, yeah, they can. That's why we're grateful for Love Incorporated and help us to do a better job. Listen very carefully as Mark Smith reads this text. Listen especially for the generosity and the heart that we're supposed to have in giving generously.
Please stand and turn to Deuteronomy 14:22 through 29. And we're going to look ahead to Deuteronomy 15:19 through 23 as well. Be sure to set aside a tenth of all that your fields produce each year. Eat the tithe of your grain, new wine and oil, and the firstborn of your herds and flocks in the presence of the Lord your God at the place he will choose as a dwelling for his name, so that you may learn to revere the Lord your God always. But if that place is too distant, and you have been blessed by the Lord your God and cannot carry your tithe, because the place where the Lord will choose to put his name is so far away, then exchange your tithe for silver, and take the silver with you, and go to the place the Lord your God will choose. Use the silver to buy whatever you like, cattle, sheep, wine, or other fermented drink, or anything you wish. And then you and your household shall eat there in the presence of the Lord your God, and rejoice. And do not neglect the Levites living in your towns, for they have no allotment or inheritance of their own. At the end of every 3 years, bring all the tithes of that year's produce and store it in your towns, so that the Levites, who have no allotment or inheritance of their own, and the aliens, the fatherless, and the widows who live in your towns may come and eat and be satisfied, and so that the Lord your God may bless you in all the work of your hands. Turn to Deuteronomy 15:19 through 23. Set apart for the Lord your God every firstborn male of your herds and flocks, and do not put the firstborn of your oxen to work, and do not shear the firstborn of your sheep. Each year you and your family are to eat them in the presence of the Lord your God at the place he will choose. If an animal has a defect, is lame or blind, or has any serious flaw, you must not sacrifice it to the Lord your God. You are to eat it in your own towns. Both the ceremonially unclean and the clean may eat it, as if it were gazelle or deer. But you must not eat the blood. Pour it out on the ground like water.
This is God's word. You may be seated. Thanks, Mark. You have... Most of you have, anyway, in the rack in front of your pew, a blue book that's known as a hymnal. I would like to encourage you just to open that up to 415, hymn number 415, real quickly, for you to see something that is going to be rather important. We sang this song in the first service, and as we were singing, I thought, wow, this is huge. We really need to draw attention to this. Number 415, he giveth more grace. The chorus goes like this. His love has no limit. His grace has no measure. His power has no boundary unknown unto men. For out of his infinite riches in Jesus, he giveth and giveth and giveth again. That's where we need to be. Your pastor sometimes has a very, very selfish heart, especially when it comes to limited resources. About 3 years ago, probably now 4 or 5 years ago. Boy, time goes fast. My father used to own, he's passed away now, but used to own a cider press, hand crank cider press. And my family would get together sometime in the middle of October, end of October, and make cider. You put the apples in a little hopper and you cut the bad spouts out. We're particularly that way. Didn't used to be. And you grind it up into a paste, and then you put it in a little like a burlap sack like thing, and then you press it and make cider. And it's, yeah. If you've never had cider as it's pouring off the press, do you know for about 2 minutes it's clear? It's not dark brown. The oxidation process takes place in the next 5 to 10 minutes afterward, but as it's coming off, it looks more like Werner's. Those of you from out of state who have no idea what I just said, but yeah, ginger ale. We made about, 16, 18 gallons of stuff, and I had about 4 gallons in my possession that we'd bring home and freeze and savor for the next, some of you are drooling, and savor for the next year. Shortly after we had pressed this, we invited the official board or the pastor's cabinet over for dinner. And Gene said, "Do you want to serve the cider?" I said, "No." Until now, they never knew that. What was my reluctance? The frozen cider is almost as good as fresh, but if you get it frozen within the first hour, which we run from Blissfield as quick as we can, throw it in the freezer and spread it out so it never mind, you don't need to know all this. I was reluctant to share these wonderful resources that I thoroughly enjoy because they were limited. It's just not Christ-like. There was a guy, pastor like myself, that was going in the neighborhood and raising funds, unlike myself, because actually Free Methodists are prohibited doing that. It's in our discipline. But anyway, this pastor was going in the community to raise funds, and there was a lawyer that made between $500,000 and $700,000 every year, and everybody knew that he made this kind of money. And so the pastor asked him, "Wouldn't you like to contribute to our church? We do a lot of good in the community. We support a lot of programs that I know you're in favor of." And the lawyer was very, very sharp, said, "No! Don't you know that my mother's in a nursing home and she's got all sorts of expenses there?" And the pastor says, "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know that." "And don't you know my brother is blind and he's got 2 kids and he can't support himself and he's got all sorts of expenses?" And the pastor says, "Oh, I'm really, really sorry. I didn't know he had all this going on." "And don't you know that there's several other family members that need all sorts of financial support? And you're coming to me and asking for money?" And the pastor says, "I'm really sorry. I didn't know that was going on." And finally the lawyer said, "And if I'm not going to help them, I'm certainly not going to help you." There are 2 people in the world. You've heard this said about many different categories, but this is true in this category. There are givers and there are takers. A giver shows the Spirit of Christ evident in their lives. In fact, we need to be very keenly aware of whether or not we are exhibiting the giving spirit in our hearts and our minds, because without it, it's not evidence that Jesus is alive and well in your heart. The question before the house, if you'd like to follow along in the sermon outline, I would encourage you to do that. The question before the house is this: what does God through Moses want us to see in these passages? I believe it's this: God blesses us and empowers us so we can be a blessing to others. We are to be like the one whose image and likeness we bear, who uses his resources and power for others. The God of the universe tells us in 1 Timothy chapter 6 that he has provided us with everything for our enjoyment. That means the entire universe, the entire world, God has provided for us so that we might enjoy life in all of its abundance. Why do we remain so stingy with our apple cider? The word for the day is generous. God's people should be generous people. God's people should be willing to give. And there's a great book for anybody dealing with benevolence ministries, dealing with the poor, or dealing with ministries of mercy. There's a great book by Tim Keller I would encourage you to read if you're interested in this. And the name of the book is called Ministries of Mercy. Ministries of Mercy by Tim Keller. And in that book, he says that as Christians, we should give until it hurts. We should give until we don't want to give anymore, but give a little more. Because if you're giving out of your excess, it really isn't giving. There's no sacrifice involved. You're just allowing somebody else to have resources that you had in abundance anyway. Maybe they were even going to go to waste if you didn't use them. My wife and I raised tomatoes, and this year we've had great tomatoes. Actually, our tomatoes, out here on the table, we have tomatoes from, a lot of those are ours. And you think, well, you're so generous. Oh, no. We're trying to get rid of them. Rotten tomatoes do not smell good. It's really pretty selfishly motivated. But we actually set a stand out on our road and said, free tomatoes. Nobody took them. Go figure. That's not a sacrifice. That's not really giving. It's just getting them out of the way. We should give until it hurts. Barna has all sorts of research that would be very, very interesting for you to pursue. But over the years, he's discovered that people that are retirement age and older actually give about 4% of their income to any type of charitable work. Those that are 18 to 25 only give about 1.2%. So it seems to be the older you are, the more you're going to give to charitable work. What's really interesting about Barna's research is that those that make $12,000 a year and less actually give about 2.8% of their income to charity. But those that make $100,000 or more only give 1.5%. So it seems to be the more money you make, the less you actually give percentage-wise to charity, which doesn't make sense at all unless we become tight-fisted and close-hearted. I think Jesus had something to say about that it's impossible for the rich to get into heaven. 7% of Christians tithe 10% to the church. 18% of Christians give nothing to the church. The average U.S. Christian gives about 2.4% of their income to the church. All these statistics to just kind of show you where the American church is and where, how far we are from God's standard, which I believe is a tithe. In fact, a lot of people that I respect in regard to the tithing in the New Testament, because there's not a whole lot, not much at all in the New Testament about tithing, they look at a tithe as basically the base standard, and it really should be above that if we have the right heart towards God. There was one time another pastor that was talking to somebody, and the person got very, very irritated with the pastor because they were talking about giving, a lot like what I've had experience in my life. And the person said, "That's all you pastors do is talk about give, 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 give." And the pastor thought, you know what? That's what the Christian life is give, 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 give. Freely you've been given, freely you should give to others. There's a really interesting new technique. This is kind of a joke. New technique for giving. It's called the 3 simple steps to explosive giving. I want to share this with you just to kind of lighten your hearts a little bit before we get into the heavy stuff. Here's what you do. The ushers give offering envelopes, a lot like what you have in the pews. Here you have a number that's assigned to you, or you put your name on it. And you put your offering in the offering plate. It's brought forward to the altar, and it's put in a big hopper, and the hopper is spun around like this. And then the acolyte, the ones who light the candles, are brought up to the altar, and they pick one of the envelopes out. And the envelope that's picked out is announced, and double their money, what's inside the envelope, is given back. Now, this will do many, many things in your service. First, you will never have problem getting people to use offering envelopes, because they'll want to use offering envelopes. You can put a stipulation that you can only have an offering envelope if you're a member, which will make your membership rise right through the roof. People will put more money in the envelope, but with the prospect of getting more money back. This is all a joke. Some of you are taking me way too serious here. Please understand that I'm not prescribing to this at all. Your worship service will have new heights of excitement as the acolyte comes. In fact, you won't have any trouble getting acolytes, because they'll be the whole heroes of the service, and everybody will be breathlessly waiting for the offering envelope to be taken out and for the winner to be announced. And you'll never have to worry about paying for those offering envelopes. People will begin to pay for their own offering envelopes. In fact, the bingo syndrome will kick in, and people will buy many offering envelopes in order to increase their chances at getting drawn. And the real kicker for a pastor is this. Pastors don't have to worry about preparing for a message, because it's way down the list in the priorities for the service anyway. Here's the kicker. I know churches that do this. I know churches that, in effect, have the same principles in work here and are doing this. What is wrong with our hearts that we have to work with gimmickry in order to get people to give? Here we go. What do we need to learn from this passage? 1, everything is God's. Please understand that the earth is the Lord's and everything in it, the world and all who live in it. Psalms 24:1. You are who you are by God's grace. You own what you own by God's grace. You have been given the opportunity to be a steward over what God has given you. In fact, in verse 14:23, look what he says. Eat the tithe of your grain, your new wine and oil, and the firstborn of your herds and flocks in the presence of the Lord your God at the place he will choose to give you as dwelling in his name. In the presence of the Lord, in the place that he chooses. It's his place. He's the host. He's the one providing it. Even though we're bringing it, even though we may have sacrificed it, he's the one that provides it. We need to see that he's the host. And we need to see that he's the host of infinite resources. That's why I had you read the chorus of hymn number 415. He does not have a limited supply of cider in his freezer. He has unlimited resources. There was one time a lady by the name of Eunice Pike who was working with the Maztec Indians in southwestern Mexico. And she discovered a very, very unique cultural feature with this particular tribe of Indians. They believed with all their heart that there was only a limited amount of good resources. Even to the extent that even a good blessing or a good sharing of information was limited. This is what she says. They believe there is only so much good, so much knowledge, so much love to go around. To teach another means you must drain yourself of knowledge. To love a second child means you have to love the first child less. To wish someone well, have a good day, means you have just given away some of your own happiness, which cannot be reacquired. Folks, can you imagine living that way? You'd have to be hoarding everything. I know people living that way who don't like to share an encouraging word, who don't like to share a greeting, that don't want to share their resources, don't want to share their time, don't want to share their heart. The God of the universe says, no, I have unlimited resources, and if you'll tap into me, I will give you access to those unlimited resources because you're my child. You're a co-inheritor with Christ to everything I own. I want you to have availability to those resources so that you can bless others. You've been blessed to be a blessing. Number 2, what do you need to learn from this passage? Believers love to cheerfully give back to God what is already His. Cheerfully give to God, realizing that He's been gracious to us, and we need to graciously give back to Him. Verse 26 in our text for today, chapter 14, use the silver to buy whatever you like, cattle, sheep, wine, or other fermented drink, and anything you wish. Then you and your household should eat there in the presence of the Lord and rejoice. Wow. We only do this about once a year, and we didn't even do it last year. It's called Feaster. Feaster is the one time out of the year where I think we do worship right. We do worship the way God prescribes it, the way worship was intended to be done when they had the big feast day. And if you're not familiar with Feaster, it goes like this. We come in here and we do Easter Sunday morning worship at 8:30. We do the traditional tomb raising text and all that kind of stuff, and talk about God's grace in allowing us to have the resurrected life. Then we go to the gym and party for 2.5 hours. We're the best cooks in the church, and a lot of people put it all sorts. I mean, we have what the idea is to simulate the kind of food you get on a cruise ship, where you can just go and get whatever you want, and it's all good quality stuff, and you just party. Why? Because over and over and over and over and over again in the Old Testament, you were commanded to party. This is not an exception. So, Lord willing, Easter of 2018, we will feaster again. The only reason we didn't do it in 2017 is because my cooks were getting burnt out. Because it's huge. We need to party. We need to wake up and realize how good God has been to us, and to rejoice in the goodness of God's provision. And other fermented drink. You know how hard it is for a Free Methodist pastor to read that? Now, slowly but surely, we're reforming. Boy, I mean that on a lot of different levels. And we're starting to wake up to the reality that there is a time and a place for fermented drink. Sheep or wine or other fermented drink or anything you wish, which is our goal with Feaster. We have a dessert bar. Well, if you miss Feaster, you're an idiot. That's what worship should be. Recognizing God's goodness and wanting to take part in it, wanting to be involved in it, wanting to contribute to it in recognition to how good God has been to us. Number 3, what do you need to learn from this passage? Believers love to cheerfully give to others what God gave them. Through the Levitical priesthood, they helped out the widows, the fatherless, the orphans, those who were left with no source of income. And folks, we do that as well. In fact, part of our budget is to give to needy families. In fact, one of the most significant designated funds that people give to is needy families. And those have to be used for that purpose. In fact, it'd be really interesting to do a study of how much money actually comes in and out for needy families throughout the year, because it's much greater than our budgeted amount, because we get so much individual designated funds for that. That's what we're supposed to do. Do not neglect the Levite living in your towns, for they have no allotment or inheritance, and they're supposed to provide for the widows, for the fatherless, for the alien. I always wondered how Mother Teresa was an amazing person. I became fascinated with her after the movie. What was that name of that movie, baby? Came out about 3 years ago? The Letters. I became fascinated with her because she really struggled with her faith. I don't know if you've ever seen that movie. It was so refreshing to watch her, of all people, to struggle with her faith. I mean, you just look at her as Mother Teresa. I mean, nope, she doesn't have a struggle in the world. No. She really wondered whether or not she was even worthy to be called a Christian. Which puts me in another time zone. But it was so refreshing to see and read about her. And in fact, I got a couple of books after watching the movie just to find out how she could minister to these people. I mean, I go to nursing homes on a pretty regular basis. And can I tell you this? The nursing homes in Michigan today are really, really good quality nursing homes. I mean, the state regulates that, and you don't have the smells and the sights and the things that make some of that care very, very, very difficult to see and smell, okay? It's much, much better now than, can I just share with you? Nursing homes in Florida in the mid-90s were horrible. Not only because of the heat, but because they just didn't have regulations to monitor all that. And my wife and I ministered every month, took the youth group to minister in a nursing home down there that was horrible. And it was everything I could. I made sure I didn't eat going in, because I have a weak stomach with those kind of things, and it would have been, well, they've been ministering to me instead of me to them, okay? But I wondered how Mother Teresa could work with these people in Calcutta, and you know the situation there is exponentially worse. I mean, they're dying people. Their flesh is rotting on their bodies. You do know what human flesh smells like rotting, right? It's a putrid smell. If you've never smelled it, it's very distinct, and you can tell it the minute you smell it. Ooh, somebody's flesh is rotting. I mean, if somebody were in here were doing it, I would find you quickly. How could Mother Teresa do that? You know how she did it? Matthew 25. When I was in prison, you visited me. When I was hungry, you fed me. When I was without clothes, you clothed me. Remember that parable that Jesus told in Matthew 25? Do you remember what he says at the end of it? Actually, he says it twice in that parable. As much as you've done it to the least of these, my brothers, you've done it to me. Mother Teresa does not see the people she's dealing with at face value. She regards them all as an embodiment of Christ. And she actually ministers to them as if she is ministering to Christ, because it's not an as if for her. She is ministering to Christ. Wow. When you get that heart, when you get that attitude, it'll change your benevolence. It'll change the way you respond to people that are in need. Now, obviously, we can't give carte blanche to people. We need to be careful that our giving actually brings them closer to Jesus and not pulls them away. We need to regulate that, and that's why I told you about Tim Keller's book. But folks, we need to have that kind of heart in our giving. And the 21st century American church is not known for that kind of heart. Sidebar, real quickly. For those of you who have ministered to the Monroes in this last week, I really didn't think Richard would live this long. I really thought when Richard Monroe, his health really deteriorated from Saturday to Monday, and I thought by Monday night he'd be gone. He's still, as far as I know, he's still alive. He hasn't eaten in almost 10 days, but he continues to hang on. For those folks that have been faithful to visit the Monroes, to take food to the Monroes, to encourage the Monroes, to support them in any way, thank you. As a pastor of the Free Methodist Church, I am ecstatic that you've taken the effort to do that. For those of you who don't even know who the Monroes are, just tuck it aside. Jesus is seen when you make those kind of sacrifices. People see Jesus when you make a sacrifice of time, of resources, of encouragement to be there for other people. There are some people that don't know Jesus in that household, in that family, and they're seeing Jesus and they're grateful. And I couldn't be prouder of my congregation than I am because of you folks that have done a great job of supporting the Monroes. Okay, let's go on. Number 4, what do you need to learn from this passage? Believers learn to fear the Lord through giving by realizing it's all God's to begin with and that God blesses the blesser. Verse 23. God at the place he will choose as a dwelling for his name so that you may learn to revere the Lord your God always. Verse 29. So that the Lord your God may bless you in all the work of your hands. If you sow sparingly, if you sow one tomato plant, I don't know why anybody would be so foolish to do that. We have 15 tomato plants? We have 15 tomato plants. Yes. And we are abundantly blessed. How is your sowing of generosity going? If you're sowing generously, you'll reap generously. If you're sowing sparingly, it's the law of the harvest. Okay, let's move on. What's your point? Worship the God who owns the universe, who models for us generous, gracious, charitable giving. The God of the universe has given us all things to enjoy. The very least we can do is show him our appreciation for all that he's given to us. Next, gospel application. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish but have eternal life. Jesus owned it all. It's very clear in the New Testament that Jesus was the one that created it all, that he designed created the universe out of nothing. It's all his. It's all there for him. It's all his at his disposal. But look what Philippians chapter 2 says. Each of you should look not to your own interests, but also to the interests of others. Your attitude should be the same of that of Christ Jesus, who being in the very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be grasped, but made himself nothing. Taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness, and found himself in appearance as a man, he humbled himself and became obedient to death, even the death on a cross. The God of the universe took all of his resources, including his reputation and his status and his time and his power, and put it at our disposal for our salvation and for our needs because he was so blessed and wanted to bless us that he made himself nothing. That should be our model. That should be our heart. Spiritual challenge. Catch the vision of heaven on earth. God's will on earth as it is in heaven. Be generous. Be loving. Be like Jesus and be a cheerful giver. You are blessed to be a blessing. And folks, I'm looking around at all of you. And you are all blessed. If you don't think so, you need to spend a week in a third world country. We throw away almost every day, individually, we throw away almost every day more than most families in third world countries eat, the entire family. We have forgotten how blessed we are. If I had time, I'd read to you the prayer of proclamation that Abraham Lincoln instituted on, I think it was April 12th, 1863, when he called for a national day of prayer for the United States. Boy, that's the heart of where we are right now. We've forgotten how blessed. We are intoxicated with our own success, if I remember right what Lincoln said. We have forgotten that we are successful because God has chosen to bless us. And we need to use that blessing to bless others, not to hoard it. God has a way of working things out to bless us in ways we never dreamed or imagined. My wife and I are doing really well. In fact, I keep begging this may sound strange, but I keep begging the pastor's cabinet to reduce my salary. But there's reasons why they don't, and I understand that. But my wife and I are, for the first time in our lives, are doing really well financially. We don't have any kids. Just be honest. My kids are all through school. I didn't pay for their school anyway. I just paid for their room and board. They had to pay for their education. That's the way it was for me, and that's the way it's going to be for them. So those of you who have your entire education paid for, you better appreciate it. Anyway, that's a side note. But my wife and I are doing really, really well. And the Lord blesses us in ways that I just find amazing. If you ever read Malachi, chapter 3 especially, talks about how God loves to bless us in just allowing things to go well. Not necessarily money and not necessarily gifts, or just, you're not paying $50 to fix this and $100 to fix this. All my cars for the last 30 years have been peaches. That means really good. We've gotten over 200,000 miles out of every one of them. They just run and run and run, and all we do is put tires and oil and gas in them, and they just keep running. Those of you who have car problems, you're obviously a horrible sinner, and so you... That's not true. I could see some of your faces. God chooses to do what he wants to do. And some of you may have car problems because God has some incredible lesson for you to learn. I don't know. I'm not God. But I do know this for us. My wife and I have tried to be faithful in our giving back to God. God's been incredibly faithful to us. More ways than I can even dream of. And we don't buy new cars. Every car we've ever bought has been at least 3 or 4 models old. Not model years old. There was one time a guy in Sussex, England, during World War II, a farmer, and he sent a letter to a missionary society and saying, I would love to give more to your missionary society, but this year has been a hard year. There was a drought all year. We couldn't water our crops, and my crops didn't produce nearly as much, but I'm giving you above what I normally give you and what is sacrificial because I just want to support your ministry so much. Could you please pray for me and pray for our crops, and could you please pray that the U-2 missiles that are coming over from Germany don't hit our farm because they've been blowing up all around the area here, and we fear for our lives. And so the Missionary Society got their gift, wrote back to them, says, thank you so much for your gift. Although we don't feel compelled to pray for you in regard to the U-2, we will pray for you that God will provide for your needs. Within a week, a U-2 missile just landed about 200 yards back of their barn and blew a huge crater in the middle of their field. And it opened an artesian well underneath, and they were able to water all their crops from that artesian well. God has a really interesting way of answering our prayers. Don't limit the God of the universe. So what? The world will always be a jungle as long as it is every man for himself. The world will be heaven on earth when we learn that it truly is more blessed to give than to receive. I'm going to close with this illustration. There was one time like a 4-year-old girl that was at Toys R Us, which I hear they're in financial trouble. But this was before they got in trouble. But this little girl was from well-to-do parents. In fact, her grandparents had given her a lot of money for her birthday, and she had like $50 to $75 to spend for her birthday. And she didn't understand what $50 to $75 was, so she was going through Toys R Us, and she would pick up a doll and say, "Daddy, could I buy this doll?" And her daddy said, "Oh, yeah, you got enough money to buy that doll." And then she'd run someplace, "Daddy, could I buy this game?" "Oh, yeah, you got money to buy that game. Your grandma and grandpa gave you a lot of money." And she would run up and down the aisles and pick out something and say, "Daddy, do I have enough money to buy this?" "Oh, yeah, you got money to buy this." And she looked over in another aisle, and there's a little boy who had pants that were too short for him and frayed sleeves on his shirt, and obviously a poor little boy. And he held up a game and he said to his daddy, "Daddy, do I have money enough for this?" And his daddy said, "No, honey, you don't have money for that. In fact, we need to look probably at coloring books because that's all you got the money for. It's like a 50-cent coloring book." And so the boy put the game back and hung his head, and they started looking for the coloring books. And the little girl ran over and grabbed the game and said, "Daddy, do I have enough money for this game?" Same game that the boy had just picked out. And Daddy said, "Yeah, honey, you got enough money." And she hurried to the cash register and paid for it, and then whispered something in the cashier's ear and gave him the game. He put it in the sack, and the little girl and her father went around to the exit to stop and watch. The little boy came and paid for his 50-cent coloring book. And as he was finishing up his purchase, the cashier pulled the game out of underneath in the bag and said, "Here, little boy, you get this gift." And the little boy opened the pack and said, "Daddy, this is the game that I wanted." And the father looked at his daughter and said, "Honey, that was a great thing that you did for that boy. Why did you do it?" And the little girl said, "Well, Grandma and Grandpa said that I could buy anything that would make me happy, didn't they?" "Yeah, honey, that's what they said." "Well, Daddy, that's what I did." Do you have a heart that makes you happy to bless the lives of somebody else? That's when real love kicks in. That's when life becomes abundant. That's when we start to enjoy the life that is truly life. When it becomes all about somebody else. When we become like Jesus. Let's pray.